Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Morning.
Looking out at a beautiful day, beautiful weekend ahead, it looks like. So
Looks like it.
happy to be here. We've got a quick one today. We're all a little busy, and so we just wanted to get on here and chat a little bit about encroachments. And we've got I don't know, just an issue that came across our desk this week about encroachments on city land versus neighbors' lands, private land, I suppose. And this, I guess, is with respect to Calgary mostly, but and then how repairs relate to closings. And Sam, I'm getting feedback on your channel there. So
Okay.
So typically in a purchase contract, there's a standard term in Alberta that says that a real property report with municipal compliance must be provided for detached properties where there's property lines. So what that means is there's going to be a survey showing the home, where it's kind of located, and any structures on the property. They have to comply with municipal bylaws, and what that means is setbacks and zoning requirements and permitting requirements and things like that. So we're still getting a lot of feedback there, so.
Yeah, sorry.
The issue can be if you have a non-permitted structure on the property that you may need to get a relaxation from the municipality. And so, in the city of Calgary, I'm thinking like maybe an oversized shed could become an issue if you didn't have a permit to construct it, or if it's too close to a property line and things like that, or maybe over the property line. That's often a big challenge when a permanent structure is located on the other side of a property line. So, I know what are the resolutions, I guess, that we often see when you have a structure that's crossing a property line.
Yeah, so I mean, commonly you'd have to receive an encroachment agreement from the other property owner. Am I still feeding back?
It's okay when you're talking. Just when we talk, it comes back into the mic.
Oh, strange. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna. Well, you carry on. I'm gonna change locations, and I will. I'll feed in momentarily here.
Then maybe I'll chime in. I guess one of the things, one of the straightforward solutions, I guess, would be for the buyer to accept the RPR as it is. You can certainly, in the contract, it says that you have to have a current compliant RPR, but if the buyer and seller agree to accept the current RPR as it stands, whether or not it's compliant with city bylaws, then I suppose it can go forward without getting hung up on that technicality. I think probably Sana was going to address whether or not you can go ahead and get agreements put in place with whatever neighboring parcel requires that encroachment or easement. I mean, if it's city land or if it's a neighbor and private land, that's the other alternative, I guess, is to make sure those agreements are put in place. I don't know, Dan, what are the others, I guess? Or I suppose you remove the offending piece of property.
Yeah, we've seen that in the past where, there's been a deck, for example, that encroached 3 inches over the property line. In that case, it happened to be just deck boards that ran over the property line, and they just overhung the actual structure. And so we had a creative realtor go down and remove the offending deck boards with a saw and making it compliant within a matter of minutes. So so there's often very very different ways you can deal with those, and the creative realtor in question is this guy over here. So
yeah, I went down with a skill saw and just cut it off, took pictures, sent it to the surveyor, and they removed it from the survey kindly to show that it did no longer encroach. So, and to that point, sorry to jump in, but to that point, there used to, the companies used to do that, and we could check, maybe they still do, where when you get a real property report, if there are slight encroachments, like a curb that runs into the city, and that's a common one, where your curb around a sidewalk, let's say, or a driveway, runs into city property, the surveyor will allow you to go back, and for no charge or for a minimal charge, they will resurvey it, allow you to remove that encroachment, rather than getting an encroachment agreement. Some of these encroachment agreements can be ridiculous. I had one case where the city would not allow the encroachment. It was a retaining wall that I had to retain, but if I remove the retaining wall was there existing from 1950, but it was actually on city land. If I removed it, the city would no longer allow me to replace it, to what I recall. So there's some pretty strange policies at the city. That was on that last house that we had. Anyway, it's a mixed bag for sure.
Yeah, we often see that with structures that have been in place for years, decades, where they're just getting surveyed today for maybe not the first time, but the first time in a long time. And they become a bit of a challenge. The city sees those and they mark them as encroachments required or easements required. We had one recently for a driveway that had been in place for 40 years. And, the city decided that there was an easement required for that driveway all of a sudden. And, there was a nominal fee for it. And I think part of the challenge with those is that the city didn't have, I should say, great record keeping for those types of structures or features, I guess. A driveway is not much of a structure, but the city has recently begun maintaining copies of real property reports. And so if there was a survey done and an encroachment advisory that had been voided, there was nothing to register. And so the city had no record of the nothing that was registered. And so when you go back for a new survey, even if it shows the same structures, they're flagging that again. And so having that old survey in hand is definitely valuable to the new survey company and to the city if you want to get that.
Yeah. And to that point, in a lot of towns, smaller towns and rural properties, an RPR is not always required, even though our standard contract says an RPR is required. I know in a lot of towns, the municipalities just simply don't provide compliance. And if there are no structures on the property, then a real property report is not required. So those are a couple other things to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's right. There's nothing to comply if there are no structures. If it's just land.
Maybe that's a good thing to mention, though, is that a real property report only documents things that are permanent structures, and something like a child's playhouse or even a shed that's small enough and movable may not be recorded on the real property report. But I also feel like it's sometimes just up to the discretion of the surveyor. If they feel like it's a permanent structure, it gets recorded on the RPR.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Now, what about, we talked a lot about city. So what about if you have a structure or an encroachment on a neighboring parcel? How do we deal with those, or what are the paths to getting resolution on those?
You have to get those encroachment agreements have to be signed off by the offended party, and so you have to make sure that you've got some good relations with them, because they don't have to sign off on that. And I guess the alternative is that you just simply encroach. And the other alternative is title insurance.
One example we see often as
showing as encroaching, if you will, on a real property report is a fence. This is something that I kind of personally have a challenge understanding. You know, a fence is often a shared structure, and so if they're showing a fence line running off the property line one way or the other, you know, it might show as encroaching where there's no way to really know if that was your fence or the neighbor's fence, and if it's the neighbor's fence, it's not encroaching. And you know, I had this this challenge. There was a bare piece of land with only a fence on it. There was a house that had burned down, and the buyer stated they wouldn't close unless we had an encroachment agreement with the neighbor for this fence that was really the neighbor's fence, but it showed on the survey. So, you know, in that case, we were able to ask the surveyor to kindly remove the fence that was not on the property and was on the neighboring property from the survey, and therefore, you know, there's no more encroachment because it's not on the property, so why show it? So, yeah, there's some creative ways of dealing with those things, and oftentimes, you know, it's just maybe an understanding of what a shared structure could be, like a sidewalk or a fence or pergola, maybe if it covers a couple of walkways.
Yeah, true enough. I have a case where a neighbor built a fence between our properties, but he built it wholly on our property, a foot onto our property. So we're just in the process of sending them a notice saying, thank you for building a fence. It's our fence. So, just so that you know. Yeah, so
Be aware, yeah, if you're building a new fence, be aware of the property line and if it's your fence or your neighbor's fence. For sure.
it pays to get these surveyed. So when you have a survey, I think getting the surveyor out to perform a real property report probably would cost you about another $100 in that range to have the property pinned. And so if you're just leaving the residence, or if you want to do the buyer a favor, then it makes sense to do that.
And pinned means putting physical markers at the corners of the property, so you can see the delineation of your actual property lines. So, yeah. Well, with that, I think we're kind of at our time limit for today. So thanks everyone for watching. And if you have any questions about real property reports, or if you need a recommendation for a surveyor, feel free to reach out. And we've got a number of companies that can suggest that do great work in Calgary and across the province.
That's great. Happy summer.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.